Really what I'd love to do, because Brian mentioned it's a pretty interactive group, is to really sort of have a dialogue. So rather than a monologue and using PowerPoints and so on, I think it really would be good to have a dialogue on a couple of these aspects. And what I was thinking was, when I talked last year, the focus really was talking a little bit about leadership. And for those who weren't here, just a Cliff Note version of this, that everybody talks a lot about leadership. We hear about it, the lack of leadership, whether it's government, academia, business. We keep talking about it. But what I find interesting is very few people ever get very specific as to what do we really need. Concretely, what do we each need to do to be a better leader? And those of us that are managing or developing other folks to be leaders, what does that really look like? So I thought it was helpful to really try to get concrete about that and to talk about things that we could all do to get much better. And I talked about the fact that some of the characteristics of leaders, and as I mentioned some of these things, if there are things that when you think of leaders that you respect, really would say people you worked for, read about, had the chance to meet, how many of these characteristics do they have? And then equally important, since we're all trying to become better leaders, how many of these things can you honestly say, that's a characteristic I have. I'm pretty good at that one. I'm not that good at others. And the whole thought process for me was thinking about some of the things that leaders do. And I'll just mention a couple of these, and then we get into the dialogue. If there's some of these that would be truly helpful that you want to get a little bit more specific or some examples, happy to do it. But I thought about the fact that leaders that I know, no matter what areas they're involved in, I find to be people who, first and foremost, are capable of keeping things simple. There is this amazing fact in a lot of areas, and a lot of functions, okay, IT being one of them. I'll pick on IT, but I'll pick on HR, finance, everybody else. There is this need in the part of a lot of people to constantly explain how complicated things are. Right? These are the people who come into my office, whatever I'm doing, as the CEO, whatever, and say, Harry, I need to talk to you. I need to explain how complicated this is. And I was always the guy who said, I got a better idea, Ryan. Got a better idea. There's always a disadvantage sitting in the front, right? I got a better idea, Ryan. Why don't you go back to your office? Why don't you figure out how to keep it simple, and then we'll talk about it. Ryan will say, well, but it's very complicated. And you have to say in a very nice way, Ryan, that's why we have you, okay? That's why we pay you, okay? Or as my grandfather would say, that's why they call it work, okay? So this ability to take things and actually make them simple is an enormous part of leadership, an enormous part of leadership. And the reason why, having thought about this now for a lot of years, why this I think is difficult is that this expression you hear a lot, no matter what university, what college, what business, whatever, they'll describe a guy like Joe, and they'll say, well, what kind of guy is Joe? And they'll describe Joe, and they'll say, well, Joe's a really good guy. He's a really good guy, hard worker, but the problem with Joe, he gets lost in the trees. He doesn't really see the forest. You're familiar with that expression? You get lost in the trees? My challenge, and you can figure out where each of you stand and where the people who work for you stand, I'm convinced, having spent a lot of time thinking about this, there's a lot of people who don't even get to the trees. They're down in the root system someplace, okay? If they saw a tree, they wouldn't know what to do. The idea there's a forest, it's like a black hole for these people, okay? And I have to say, somebody who's going to be an effective leader and who's going to influence people, they somehow have to get from roots to trees to the forest. They've got to be able to put this in perspective. They've got to be able to see the big picture. That doesn't mean we're not going to get into the details, because obviously we have to understand the details. But if you can't get out of the weeds, out of the trees, out and into the forest, I think you're going to have a very difficult time being able to relate to people in senior positions. And obviously, if you think about it, if you can relate to people, okay, if I can relate to Phil, then maybe I'll be able to start to influence Phil. And if you think about leadership very simply, leadership is really all about the ability to influence people. Right? So it's not who you control, it's not who reports to you. The really strong leaders are the people who figure out it's all about influence. And the way you influence people is you relate to them, and they have to be able to understand you in order to be able to relate to you. Okay? So this whole idea of keeping things simple, I also like to get people to think about another thing that leaders do, which is employ common sense. Right? And as I mentioned in the book, I always quote Mark Twain, the American humorist, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn. One of the things that Mark Twain supposedly said, if you stop and think about it, everything is common sense. The problem, he said, is that common sense is not common. Common sense is not common. Now, in addition to being sort of a cute phrase, the more organizations I work with, the more conference rooms I observe, I realize it is true. Common sense is not common. Now, the way I'll give you an example of this that many of you have seen, and again, it's always fun to pick on the people in the front here. The reality of it is you can have a conference room, right? We're all in a conference room, okay? Virginia gets up to the team and says, now, I know this doesn't make sense, but, and she continues to talk, okay? Now, if you study this, it's sort of interesting. Virginia has admitted it doesn't make sense and feels the need to continue to talk. That's sort of interesting to me. But even more interesting is Kathy, who hears her say that it doesn't make sense, doesn't stop her, right? And in fact, there's almost a sense of, you know what, we're not sure why we're here. We haven't even really defined the problem. We can't leave till 5. Virginia, just keep talking. Just keep talking, okay? As opposed to, I think, the leader in a very respectful way. Very respectful way. Hey, Virginia, you know, you said A, B, and C. Now you said Mars. I mean, what are we talking about here? We can't waste time. We have to be respectful of one another. We got to get some stuff done, right? So simple, common sense. The third characteristic I get you at least to think about is this whole idea of starting ASAP. Because, again, I don't know if you've thought about this, but when you talk to younger leaders, some of the folks that are in your organizations, when you talk about leadership, I've come to the realization that a lot of young leaders will say, I know this discussion is important. I know that developing these skills is really critical. But, Harry, at this point in time, I'm just starting out. I don't have anybody reporting to me. I'm a single contributor. I know it's important. So when I've got 5, 10, 20 people or whatever, I'm going to take this leadership thing seriously. But right now, I really can't do much in terms of leadership. And as I always explain to the students or the executives in these programs, I describe it as I have virtually no answers, but like many people in this room, I got a lot of opinions, right? A lot of opinions. So I'll share opinions. My opinion is that leadership works exactly the opposite. That the people or the leaders are the people who start leading long before they have anybody reporting to them. And I don't know if you have the same reaction, but when I literally say long before they have anybody reporting to them, I literally remember back 30 years ago being in a cubicle with a bunch of folks, and it was just almost clear from day one who are the people that were going to be leaders, who were going to be running functions, divisions, areas, whatever. And you say, well, how did you know that? What is it about these folks? And if you think of some of them, and hopefully some of them are in this room, these are the people, the way I think about it, these are the people who do not let the organizational structure get in the way. Okay? They don't. They see an issue, or they see an opportunity, and they basically realize somebody's got to do something about it. I'm going to do something about it. Okay? And in a lot of organizations, I mean, I don't know how true this is to yours, but having studied this quite a bit now, I realize in a lot of organizations, somebody will see an issue. Okay, is it Kita? Kika. Kika sees the issue. Kika says, you know what? This is a problem. We got to do something about it, right? Ryan says, absolutely right. We got to jump on this. And then Michael says, well, wait a minute. No, that's another division. That's another unit. You know, we have to respect that particular area because we get really caught up. I don't know if you notice this. We get really caught up in this organizational structure, the boxes, who reports to who. If you actually think about it, though, it's interesting. The only people who care about the boxes are the people that are in them. Okay? Nobody else cares. Okay? Nobody else cares at all. Think of it when you're the customer, right? I'm the customer. I've got a problem. I call Phil. Okay? Hey, Phil, you know, I look at my account here. I've been charged twice on this credit card thing. Phil, you have to fix this. Phil says, well, Harry, I'm glad you called the 800 number here. Let me explain who you need to talk to. No, don't explain anything. Okay? I got you. I got you. Well, let me transfer. No, I've been on hold for 20 minutes. Don't transfer me to anybody, okay? I got you. You're the organization, okay? And the leader basically says, you know what? This is my problem. I'm going to own this thing. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to make it happen. This is not, you know, some bureaucratic, let's find somebody else to pass the bucket to. So this whole idea of simple, common sense, starting as soon as you can, I think becomes really, really critical. Now, I talk in the book about what I summarize as a couple of principles. And I talk about the fact that there's 4 things I think that leaders focus on, okay? And I'll just mention them, and if any of them you want to talk through, more than happy to talk a little bit about it. But in a particular order, I talk about what really strong leaders do is, number 1, they're self-reflective. They really take the time to stop the noise They forget about all the crazy things they're trying to do. They stop confusing activity and productivity, because everybody's active. What really matters, in what order, turn off the noise, and really think. Take the time to think of what really matters. Okay? Separate out activity and productivity. So this whole self-reflection, we could talk about for quite a while. That's first. Second, I think the strong leaders, and hopefully we have a lot of them in the room, these are the people who are capable of keeping things in balance. Okay? Because I could raise just about any topic today, right? We could talk about Greece, we could talk about Spain, we could talk about Penn State, we could talk about any number of issues. Virtually any issue we talk about, immediately we'd have very, very strong opinions. Very strong, particularly in this country, right? Blue states, red states, liberals, conservatives, everybody has a very, very strong opinion. The problem is nobody understands the other sides of the story, right? That's why we get nothing done, because everybody understands just their side. You know, one of the things my grandfather used to say when I would argue with him or something, he would say, Harry, life is much, much simpler if you only understand your side of the story. Okay? It gets much more interesting when you realize there's multiple sides. In fact, one of my big learnings, I mentioned to Brian, when you're teaching and consulting, you realize you learn so much from the group, if it's particularly it's interactive. The first time I started teaching 6 years ago, I did say it's really important to understand the other side of the story. One of the students said, well, does that assume there's only two sides? And I said, that's a great point. I'll never say the other side again. It's multiple sides. Right? And that ability to step back, it's another one of these examples of getting from the weeds to the trees to the forest and understanding how it all fits together, right? Because a lot of folks, I can have a little discussion with Ryan and say, well, Ryan, I really don't understand where you're coming from. Well, if you think about it, that's a little ignorant. If I take the time, I can understand where he's coming from, then I'll decide whether I agree or disagree. But I want to understand all sides of the story, and I'm going to do it very, very quickly because time is of the essence, right? This is not all about, self-absorption, just contemplation for the sake of contemplation. It's literally, what are the values? What really matters? How do I think about this and really understand all sides of the story? And we can talk about, and give you some examples of this need to balance, because it's huge in terms of leadership. So we talk about self-reflection. We can talk a lot about balance. The third one that I think is really important in all of your roles, I truly believe from leadership, is what I refer to as true self-confidence. And again, this whole thing about true self-confidence, often people will say, what's the true thing? You're either self-confident or you're not. Well, many of us have worked for people who can act very self-confident, who have no self-confidence, right? No show of hands, but these are those wonderful people who, the macho, they have to be right, they've never made a mistake, just do what I told you to do crowd, right? When I talk about true self-confidence, and I think that's a good one just to honestly sit back and ask yourself, do you have true self-confidence? Here's a couple ways of things to ask yourself to figure out whether you have it or not. I actually think of it as you step back, you turn off the noise, turn off the gadgets, you get off by yourself, and you actually start to realize there will always be people brighter than I am, more athletic than I am, more articulate than I am, more fill in the blank, but I'm okay. I'm okay. I know what I know. I know what I don't know. I'm a learning person. I'll get better each and every day. I know what I know. I know what I don't know. And by the way, in a lot of organizations, I don't know if this happens in yours, in a lot of organizations, there's this incredible focus on what I'm not very good at, development needs and so on. I've always thought about it a little bit differently, which is everybody in this room got to where you are because of your strengths. That's how you got here. So one thought would be, how about I get better at the things I'm already good at? Now the things I'm not that good at, I'll try to get better, but at a minimum, I'll surround myself with people that are much better at the things I'm not that good at. Not a revolutionary concept, okay? The team thing was like thousands of years ago, right? Thousands of years ago, Phil and I are in the cave. Phil, you get the berries, I'll get the meat, we'll meet back at the cave, right? This is not nuclear fusion here, right? But if you think about it, you do have to admit what you're good at and what you're not good at, right? Now, when I do this with executives, it's sort of interesting because some executives will say, I understand the self-reflection. The balanced one's a little hard for me because I think I know the answer, which is unfortunate because there are multiple answers. But then when we talk about true self-confidence, they'll often say, you know, Harry, I don't know about this true self-confidence thing. Harry, I got a big team. I'm not sure I want my team to know what I'm not good at. I don't know if I want to divulge that, right? I'm the one who's got to explain they already know, okay? They already know. Has anybody, no show of hands, has anybody ever had a boss who couldn't write a book on what they weren't good at? Okay? I could write very long books, all right? And if Kathy's my boss, thank God she doesn't understand everything, because if she knew everything, she wouldn't need me, and I need a job, okay? So it isn't about knowing everything, but it's about knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and surrounding yourself with people, right? Self-reflection, balance, true self-confidence, and the last one is genuine humility, which I think if you do the first three, this one becomes obvious, because if you asked folks, if we did a little survey this afternoon and said, how did you get to where you are? Two most frequent responses as to how we got to where we are: I worked hard, and there's a couple things I'm really good at. Those are two most frequent responses. And I always think to myself, that makes sense, that's pretty logical, but I like to add three others to that. One is luck. Hello, luck, all right? Another one is timing. Being in the right place at the right time is hugely helpful. I always tell folks, just practical reality, there was probably another 20 people who could have been the CEO of Baxter, okay? You work hard, you got certain skill sets, but luck, timing, and depending on your view of life, maybe there's somebody upstairs directing the play, okay? Maybe it's not all about you, and if you realize it's not all about you, I think most of us start to come to the conclusion, we're not going to forget where we came from, because most of us don't start off with very much. You keep things in perspective. You don't read your own press clippings. If you do, you don't believe them. You just keep centered and balanced. And I think if you got those principles in place, then I think you got a pretty good sense of being able to lead yourself. And I really do believe before you can lead others, you got to figure out how to lead yourself, right? And you never get to where you'd like to be on these, because it's a learning process, it's a journey. You just keep raising the bar. So am I becoming more self-reflective? Am I becoming more balanced? Am I developing more true self-confidence? Do I really have genuine humility? Okay, so those are a couple of the principles. Now, what Brian and I talked about a little bit was, if I now get specific and I'm trying to apply these things, are there a couple things that you can apply to a specific functional area? I often have used this example related to finance, but I think it's equally applicable to any function. So if I just sort of plug IT in, there's a couple things I'll get you to think about, maybe. But you ought to challenge it. These are all things to think about. What I would love to ask folks, this is something to think about, another thing to be self-reflective of, do you, as an individual, really want to be a phenomenal IT professional who happens to work for a particular institution? Okay? Or do you want to be a leader in helping drive that organization who, among other things, happens to know a lot about IT? Now, I have to tell you, that is much more than a semantic difference. Okay? It is huge. It is huge. Because there are a lot of people who want to get so focused on their area that they actually see their area as being the reason for existence, as opposed to what are we really trying to do. In fact, the example that I give, because it's just a personal example, I can remember 30 years ago being a young guy in finance at Baxter, and a lot of the finance folks were sort of the view, you know what, we can't really have much of an impact. It's really run by sales and marketing folks. We're, in fact, the expression, some people say we're at the back of the parade, other people say, no, we're behind the elephant, okay? I mean, this is just a miserable place to be, right? And we were waiting, it was really interesting, we were waiting for somebody to get us involved, right? We were waiting for somebody to get us into those meetings. And then all of a sudden it sort of dawned on me, you know what? We're gonna be waiting forever. This is like waiting for Godot. Nobody is gonna call us, okay? The phone is not going to ring. All right? So we've either got to get to the front of the parade or forget it. So there's a little bit here, you hear that expression, are we going to ask for permission? Are we going to ask for forgiveness? Are we willing to take a risk? Are we willing to get out of our comfort zone? And the irony is, a couple of us, 30, 20 years ago said, we're not waiting around. Okay? We will be respectful. Okay? Got to respect the fact that there's some folks up there, but we're going to really make a difference. And we literally started to do it in a very, very big way. To which the irony, obviously you have to have a sense of humor. The irony 15 years later, okay, I become the CEO of the company. A lot of the divisions are run by financial people. Then there's people in conference rooms saying, I don't understand why these finance people are running the place. I don't understand this. This doesn't seem, you just have to decide, are we going to do something about it, right? How proactive are we going to be, right? And part of that, I think, is the ability, as I've said a couple times, I have this bad habit of repeating myself, of literally being able to look at the whole organization and understand how this whole thing fits together. Right? So the example that I use, okay, and it's just an example, and it goes back to this org chart thing. When you're in one organization for a long time, there's this view that, well, our organization is really unique. Our structure is really unique. There's something really unique about us. You know what? Having done this a long time now, I realize nothing is unique. Okay, it may look a little bit different, but as I always tease my consulting friends, you get to a certain age, I think it's after 55, you realize there's no new issues. Okay, you listen to something for a while, oh, that's a number 8. Oh, that's a number 13. Okay, it takes you a little while to figure it out, but it's almost the same. So here's where I am now on org charts. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. I can draw, and I'm not a particularly bright guy. I can draw the org chart. Okay, believe it or not, for everybody, every organization in this room. I can actually do it all at the same time. So here is your org chart, okay? It is literally a series of vertical parallel lines. That's your org chart, okay? Now, you can call them whatever you want. You can call them divisions, businesses, functions, groups, sectors, departments. Doesn't matter what you want to call them, okay? But all of us are in one of them, okay? And if we use Kathy as an example, okay, most of us start at the bottom of one of these. By the way, some people, I'm sure not in your organization, some people actually refer to these things as silos. That's something they can refer to it that way. I'm sure not in your organization. Most of us start at the bottom of one of these silos, right? And the thought process is, I'm going up. I'm moving up. So here's Michael. Michael starts moving up. He's aggressive. He's driven. He's moving up, right? Now, if you're in an organization that literally has the ability to say, we got to develop people, all right? Whether it's within a function, different areas of IT, different areas of other functions or whatever, somebody may say, hey, Michael, how about this? Maybe it's another location, maybe it's another area, maybe it's another group of people, another experience, maybe a way for you to get from roots to trees to forest. What do you think? And in a lot of organizations, I'm sure not always with Michael, but in a lot of organizations, the person looks at this and says, looks like a lateral move. I don't do lateral moves. I go up. That's what I do. I go up. Now, if you're analytical, actually, like a lot of folks in this room, and I was a math major, so I get very analytical, you look at this and say, whoa, looks like it has a negative slope. Okay. No way, Michael, no way, we just go up, right? I mean, in fact, I'm willing to do this, I'm willing to do this, I'll even do this. Can't do this, right? Now, interestingly enough, and I know this sounds overly simplistic, but if this is your organization, there's a couple things you got to realize. I would say simple common sense. There's a group of people up here, okay? That group has the same name in every organization I've seen. That group of people almost always is referred to as those guys, okay? All right? And when I say guys, men and women, but they're those guys. Now, those guys, very simply, what do those guys have to do, right? Not nuclear fusion here. Those guys have to do the same thing that each of us have to do in our departments or our little areas, which is they have to allocate resources across the entire organization, right? So let's say you've got $100 million and you've got 100 areas, all right? How's this going to work? Is it some bizarre form of communism and everybody gets $1 million, okay? Or do you say, well, no, this is the future, this is growth, this is in decline, we've got to think this through. Well, if you think about it, the only way those guys can actually do this is that they have to understand how all this stuff fits together, right? Why are we doing this and not that? Why are we organized this way and not that? So the people, in my mind, who become the leaders, and again, I hope we got a lot of these folks in the room, the people who become the leaders are not the people, interestingly enough, that are good at this or good at this. The people that are the leaders, the most effective people in the organization, are the people who get their arms around this. Why do we do this and not that? Why is it structured the right way? How does this thing work? How does this thing all fit together, right? Now, in order to be doing that, you have to sort of get out of this mindset of my little area, and you have to understand how your area fits in the context of the total. Now, how I figured this out, and this was just one of these lucky things for me, I'm in one of these units. I'm at a low level in finance, and often happens if you've got 5 children, late at night, I'm in a grocery store in Chicago. I don't remember whether the jeweler or Dominic's. I'm picking up a lot of milk, right? I'm picking up milk, I'm in line. There's a guy from Northwestern Kellogg, one of my classmates in line. He's not in healthcare, and he's not in Baxter, but he's in line. And he says, Harry, I noticed today that Division A of Baxter made an acquisition. I'm really curious. Why did you guys buy that company? Well, this was a little disturbing, I have to admit. Number one, I didn't know we had made the acquisition. All right? Now, that one, because we can all rationalize. That one I rationalized. Hey, I've been working about 14 hours today. I didn't even have lunch. I've been really focused on getting this project done. So, all right, I didn't know that. The thing that really disturbed me is that the Division A that made the acquisition, I didn't even know that was part of Baxter. Okay. That was disturbing. That was actually disturbing, right? So I basically said two things. One, never again. I literally am going to understand how all this thing fits together, okay? And I'm going to know, I have little tips to at least think about their opinions. You can see whether it helps or not. But I decided I literally was going to know at least 2 or 3 people, every unit, every function, every division, every geography. I literally, when anything happened, I could call Ryan and say, hey, Ryan, why did you guys do that? Why are you building that new system? Why is that occurring? Because I've got to understand how this whole thing fits together, right? Because I am not just going to be explaining to my boss why, the entire world is what we do, but these folks are expecting us to be able to figure out how does this fit into the total. Now, I don't know if this happens in your organizations, but in most organizations, very few people understand this. Very, very few people. And what I used to do when I was running a big division or running international or running the company, and let's just say this was my senior management team across all the geographies or whatever, I used to draw this thing. And I used to say that people from all these different individual vertical lines. And I'd say, you know what we're going to do today? Kathy, you know what we're going to do today? We're going to do something very, very unusual. Today we're going to actually pretend we all work for the same organization. Okay. How's that for just a wild one? Okay. And why I say that, because if we're honest, most of the time we don't do that. Right? I give 2 examples that some of you may relate to, maybe you've been through this, but I'm in this unit, okay? I'm in this unit, and we're coming to the end of the year, and it turns out we're going to be $3 million short. Drawing faces, no bonus. We got a real problem here, okay? We're just about ready to turn the lights off, and all of a sudden, the controller comes in, because it's usually a finance guy, and says, Harry, we're going to be okay. What? Harry, I just realized we can cross-charge this unit $3 million. So we made it. I said, well, Joe, that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. Just out of curiosity, did they know that charge is coming to them? Hell no. Well, but then they've got a real problem. Yeah, but we don't. No, we are them, okay? We actually are them, right? So the folks I think that are the leaders, when I talk about weeds, trees, forest, how do you put all this stuff in perspective? How do you step back and do it? And by the way, this actually becomes 3-dimensional, because not only do you have all the different functional areas, then you got the layers of, is it in a department, is it at a group, or is it sort of at the overall corporate level? All right? And the example that I throw out there, which may have occurred to you folks, may have not, I'm moving around different areas, different functions. Then somebody said, Harry, we want you to do a job at corporate. Well, I should draw it another dimension, because I'm up at corporate. I'm not a high-level guy. I'm a junior analyst, but I'm at corporate. The benefit of doing a job at the overall level, system level, whatever it is that now you really get a chance to see what's going on overall. So I take this job. They got me in this job for 18 months, and then they moved me to another unit. Okay? So I moved to this unit, and the guy running it, Jack, says to me, hey, Harry, here's what I need you to take a look at. Here's a problem that I want you to study. And I said, well, Jack, that's fascinating, because there's 2 or 3 people I worked with at corporate. They could help me figure that out really fast. Jack says, don't call them. Do not call them. Jack, why wouldn't I call him, Jack? Close the door. Close the door. Jack, what? He said, Harry, you know what these people at corporate do? I said, Jack, what do they do? Harry, the people at corporate, they wake up in the morning. Their whole focus is how to ruin our lives. Jack, not the case. I was with these guys. I mean, I work with them. They're good guys. Harry, we got you out just in time. Another 3 months, you would have spent the rest of your life there. Okay. So again, why do people do that? Because they really don't understand how this all fits together. Right? And I really do think that if you think about it, and you just role play this thing. If your boss is one of these people up there, okay, and they've got all these things to think about, what drives them crazy is when the functional person, and again, I'm not picking on IT. It could be IT, it could be HR, finance, it could be anything. But the person comes to them and explains, here's what we need. You know, the end of the free world will occur if we don't get it. This is what we have to have. Okay, I understand that, but now, how does that fit with everything else? And you have the look on the person's face when the senior person is looking at you to help them think about this. The look on the person's face is often what I refer to as MEGO, M-E-G-O. My eyes glaze over. Okay, it's like, what, I'm supposed to know anything other than like my area? I mean, that's all I do. All right, well, if that's all you do, I think it's going to be pretty tough to convince these people that you're somebody they can rely on to actually help you look at the total piece. Right? So this whole idea of being able somehow to be able to put this in perspective. Okay? Now, I could go on, trust me, I could go on for another 3 or 4 hours, but I really do want to have a dialogue. So what would be helpful for you guys to talk about? Either examples of things I said, some of these principles around leadership, or things I didn't mention that you'd like to talk about. And let me explain, I should have mentioned this up front. One of the things I know a lot of you know about leadership is that a big part of leadership is delegation. It really is. You can't do it all yourself, right? So here's the way this works. If you ask something fairly simple, fairly straightforward, not too complex, I take it and I'll give you my opinion, my answer. If it's more cerebral, more thought-provoking, semi-difficult, I'll just delegate that to Brian. Okay? He doesn't know that, but that's how we do this. So I'm incredibly at ease. There's really nothing you can bring up that'll be a problem. Okay? That's what you do in leadership, right? You just delegate. So, yes, maybe your name, what organization you're with.
Alan Berkey, I work for Penn State.
Penn State, huh?
Yeah, so what you described on this thing really rings.
Really what?
It really rings true for me.
Rings true, okay.
The jumping across.
Yep.
So I started off in a computer tutoring thing, became the manager there, then I worked for a campus, and then I became, then I became an IT manager there, then I moved into a program position, became an IT manager there, and then I moved into my current position and became director there. But every time I jumped across those lines, because they're all completely different silos,
Yep.
it gave me an extra third person perspective. Like, it helped me go from being flat on the paper to being here in the audience where I can see all of those lines together. So I've never been in a room, except for last year, with so many other people who have director level positions here, and I'm just wondering how many other people have also, like, has everybody else here either fought their way up through a single silo, or have they gotten to where they are now by jumping across those lines and developing that other perspective? Because whenever I go back and talk to my people back at Penn State, there are certain ones that I need to tell them that they need to leave my organization, mainly so they can develop that skill set, because they're trying to fight their way, they're trying to swim upstream and trying to fight their way up that path.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a good. So, should we just do a little show of hands? How many folks have come up one vertical path, one or two, as opposed to maybe having a little broader perspective? How many people come up one or two? Okay, and then how many folks would say would be more broader? Okay, good. All right. Well, and here's the interesting thing. And when I say we can talk about anything, and I would say opinions, here's the deal. The other thing about leadership, which is very interesting to me, is that the one size doesn't fit all. So what I find fascinating is if I'm the CEO, if I'm the president of Penn State, whatever, okay, and I'm looking at my organization, do I want people that have the breadth and the movement around a lot of different silos, or do I want people that have more depth and knowledge base and a deep understanding in areas? All right. Well, the interesting answer, at least my opinion, is yes. Okay, you want both. And the good news in life is, by the way, there's no right or wrong, good or bad. There isn't any. It really does come down to, in a really, really strong organization, you want both. But I think the key part, and this is the very, very key part, we talk about leadership, we talk about being very open. I'm a tremendous believer that what all of us have to do in whatever leadership role we're in is the development of our people. All right? And again, sounds obvious, but I don't view, if Virginia works for me, I don't view it as either good, nice, the right thing to do to help the developer. I view it as a moral responsibility. I view for Virginia to know where she stands, what her full potential is. She has to own her development, but we're going to have an open, honest, transparent discussion fairly often. This is not once a year on an HR form that goes out in the ozone someplace. This is literally, no kidding around, Virginia. My perception of what you do well, what you don't do well, what you need to work on. You tell me what you think. Does this seem right? Does this seem coherent? Should there be 3 other people that you talk to? Let's talk that through. And then I think one of the discussions really becomes, all right, Virginia, what would you like to do? Okay, what do you think in an uncertain world, what do you think you'd like to do 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do you really want to be a functional expert? And boy, we really need some of those people. So is that something like, or would you like to be broader and have a broader background where you're not the specialist, but you're managing people that are specialists and you're moving through a lot of different areas? All right, let's have that open discussion. Let's talk about your skill set. Let's see what fits. Let's see what makes sense. Let's see what you're capable of. Unfortunately, again, if we're honest about it, what often happens is that discussion doesn't happen, right? And what could happen, I'm just making this up, what could happen is, in a lot of institutions, Virginia really would like to have a lot of breadth, but nobody's talking to her. Nobody is really having that discussion. She's waiting for somebody to call her, okay? The phone's not ringing. And all of a sudden, she's been in the same area, same function, same activity for like 20 years. Then somebody like Phil comes in, who's a more broad guy. Hey, really want to take the time. Hey, Virginia, what do you think? Virginia said, well, I'd like to do a lot of these other things. Well, she's gotten up so high on one pay scale in one specialized area for so long that the ability to move her at this point, not that it's impossible, but it's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. And my perspective is, why didn't she know that 10 years ago? Why didn't somebody 15 years ago say, here are the pros and cons, here's something to think about, how do you want to keep your options open? Right? And it really is, I think, a combination of each of us having to help the people in our organization develop, but making sure each of those people know they have to own their own development. The organization is not going to own the development, nor should it. Each person has to own their own development. Maybe 30, 40 years ago it worked that way. Hey, the company will take care of me. That obviously is not the case anymore. So as long as people are aware of that, I think that becomes huge. And it's a big issue. Kita? Kika. Well, you know what? We're going to get you a microphone.
In a smaller organization where you have mostly the folks that are focused and specialists in what they do, and then you have those guys up there, there's that big gap. Yeah. How do you convey the message? How do you show them the forest when they're so focused on their specialty? Yeah. So, that's a challenge that we have in my organization.
It is a big challenge. I'm glad you brought it up. And as I said up front, Kika, I have no answers, many opinions. K-I-K-A. All right. I'm a little slow. So here's the way I think about this, and I'm glad you brought it up because this is an enormous part of leadership that doesn't get much airplay. And the way I define this challenge, and I think it is the biggest challenge, I think you brought up, I refer to this whole challenge as the ability of all of us to, I call it, lead up. Because if you think about it, we spend a lot of time talking about our team, the people that report to us. Some of us have gotten pretty good at managing our peers. But the big challenge, and let's face it, the big thing we all have to deal with if we're going to be successful is how do you lead up? Okay? So I sort of think about this as Bill. If Bill is my boss, okay? Bill's my boss. Let's think about this a minute. Bill's got a lot of activities. Okay, he's got a lot to do, all right? I got one area. Well, if I cannot figure out a way to influence Bill, I mean, obviously he's my boss, so he's not going to do things because he reports to me, because he doesn't. I report to him. And he's got a lot of other things on his mind. So my ability to influence Bill is what it's going to all be about. And do I have the ability, do I have the knowledge base, call it the enthusiasm, call it the ability to get from, once again, from roots to trees to forest, so that I can explain to Bill in a simple way what needs to get done. And again, whether it's finance folks, HR folks, IT folks, I used to tease the IT folks at Baxter all the time, okay? This may sound a little cynical, but I literally, as a math guy, you know, back in the days when your math majors 30 years ago, I had to take Fortran programming and so on. I mean, I had enough of an understanding of some of this almost to be dangerous, right? I would be sitting in meetings at different levels, and you'd be presenting to me, and literally I'd be sitting there saying to myself, this feels like this must be Russian. I have no idea what this person's talking about, okay? And by the way, it's so convoluted with all of these, what is that when you have letters that summarize? Acronyms. There's so many acronyms, I don't even know where to start, okay? Now, here's what happens, for what it's worth, here's what happens when you become a senior executive, okay? I'm not saying this is good or bad, this is just happens. When you first start to become a senior executive and you sit through that, you say, you know, I better just study this more. I'm going to get the packet. I'm going to go home tonight. I'm going to kind of figure it out. There's too much I don't understand. Then you get a little higher in the organization and say, you know, I'll try, but wait a minute. I got 5 packs of those. There's no way I can go through all those. Then you get to the point where you say, you know what? If you can't explain it, that I can understand it, it's no longer my problem. It's your problem, okay? And I got to tell you, that creates frustration, I think, for some folks. But it's like, wait a minute, I got a million things to do. I know you're the expert, I know you're the specialist, but guess what? I'm running a pretty big organization, okay? Are you part of the solution? Are you part of my problem, all right? Because if you want to explain things in a code that I don't know what you're talking about, that's a real problem, okay? That's a real problem. And I teased one guy one time, I said, you know what? Honestly, you may be Einstein, okay? But this is not going to work. Okay, I got to find somebody who's stupid enough that I can understand. Okay, and that's what I ended up doing. I found a guy who actually spoke English. Okay, big deal for me. Big deal for me. So it's you have to lead up, and there again, if you may be a specialist, and you may like being a specialist, but your ability to translate that so that somebody can explain it to those people becomes key. Right? Because if you think about it, these are not, I know we think they are, but these are not necessarily bad people, okay? Sometimes they could be, no. But those guys, they got a lot going on, right? They got a lot going on. They have more things to do than they're ever going to get done. It's a little bit like drinking out of a fire hose, and it really becomes reliant on who are the people that can actually influence them by being able to explain things in a way that makes sense. That's that ability, again, to actually make it simple. Not that it's easy, but that ability to do that is huge. I had, and again, because of my finance background, I had guys who were ahead of me in jobs. They'd want to sit together with the CEO and talk about, you know, FASB 151 and all this. I'm thinking, I don't even know what FASB is, okay? How about we put it in language they understand? You want revenue to go up, you want cost to go down, let's talk about this, right? When I became the CFO, I never called myself the Chief Financial Officer. I had my cards printed up, cash flow officer, all right? I'm into simplicity in a big way, right? And interestingly enough, the people who can keep things simple and clarity and influence are the people who usually are the most effective and have the most influence. That would be my opinion. Yes, sir. We'll get a microphone back here. Yeah.
Meet me halfway, Dan.
And what organization are you with?
Dan Jacobson, UW-Madison.
Okay.
So I've read about a couple of organizations that have institutionalized practices to encourage this kind of lateral behavior. The one that I'm thinking about in specific is 3M. And I'm kind of curious to know what other success stories you can tell about organizations that do that, and how do they institutionalize that?
Okay. Well, here's the way I think it gets institutionalized. And this is something that we did at Baxter a lot. And that was, it all comes down to the beginning, which is how do you, this is a rhetorical question, how do you develop folks in the organization? And let's just assume we're all in one organization, all right? Typical organization, again, if we're honest about it, and let's do the different cases, okay? Some organizations, they don't get into people development at all. It's sort of the view of, hey, you're there, you got a job, you know, if you like it, great. If you don't, hey, we'll find somebody else. The unemployment rate's high in the United States, so we'll get somebody else. Then you got some people that'll say, you know what? Yeah, I heard that this feedback thing is important, so we've got an HR department, we've got a human resource department, and once a year, they'll put a form out. You know, you fill it out online. Often your boss says, hey, you know, what's your name again, Dan? Hey, Dan, you know what? I'm your boss. Fill the thing out. I'll sign it. And because if we don't fill it out, some alarm rings someplace and somebody comes down on us. So just fill out the explicit deleted form and let's move on, okay? I don't know what you call that, but that's not people development. Because if you think about it, and I tell this to HR folks all the time, I happen to think, human resources, I think human resources is a very important function. I think it's very important as the folks who come up with the process for the organization, but the people who have to own it are the managers. All right? If Mike is managing people, or Phil, you know, HR may give them the process, but they've got to own it. So if Phil works for me, Phil's not going to fill out a form once a year. Phil and I are going to have a discussion probably every 2 or 3 weeks. All right? And by the way, Phil, you just made a presentation. I know we filled out that HR form 2 weeks ago, but guess what? Right now, you made a presentation. Here's what you did well. Here's what you didn't do well. Here's what I think you need to improve. What do you think? It's a constant. I care enough about his development. It's a constant discussion. So then when we're taking a walk over lunch, it's, Phil, how do you like your job? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What would you like to do 1 or 3 years from now? Well, given that, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? You get people thinking about this all the time, to the point where people in the organization have the opportunity to be thinking about it. Now, here's the other interesting thing, Dan. You ask, what do organizations do? 3M does this, Baxter does this. Interestingly enough, this is you right here. You don't necessarily have to move to another organization. Here's another one. We talk about simple common sense. I'll use my finance example. I was in finance. Well, when I had lunch, why would I have lunch with finance people if I'm working with them all day? I'd come to the cafeteria, I'd sit down with a group of engineers, true story, they got a blueprint, all right? What are you guys doing? Well, we're taking a look at whether we ought to build an intravenous fluid drug delivery plant in Shanghai. Interesting. I was a math major, I do modeling, okay? I don't know anything about China, I know very little about healthcare, and I know nothing about manufacturing, but if my boss says it's okay, if Ryan says it's okay, you know, a couple hours a day or at night or whatever, would you like some help with modeling? Next thing I know, I'm in Shanghai for 2 weeks. I learn about China, I learn a lot about manufacturing, I learn a little bit about healthcare in Asia. I'm literally, in my own bizarre way, I'm getting from roots to trees to the forest. So the people that volunteer for different projects, volunteer for different things, right? You got a lot of knowledge base, you got a lot of analytical people. You know, maybe you work on a finance project, maybe anything you can do to start to figure out what could I do very, very differently. Because one of the things that happens, I think, in business, I don't think I've ever thought about this, but in any kind of area, whether you're at a university, a hospital, a company, you know, you think about it, most of the stuff we're doing, okay, is actually fairly transferable. We're not talking about nuclear fusion here, okay? So to be able to work with another department on another project, one, it kind of increases your knowledge base. It's something that actually gives you, I was talking to somebody earlier, you know, I always had 3 goals. People ought to have some goals, whatever they happen to be. I had 3 goals 32 years ago for jobs. Interestingly enough, 32 years later, I have the exact same 3 now if I'm looking at a board or I'm looking at an activity. 3 ideas. For me, it was always, number 1, if I stay in this role another year, because me it was always, do I stay in this role another year or do I do something different? Three criteria I had. Number 1, do I have the opportunity to learn and grow? If I'm going to spend another year and I have no ability to learn and grow, boy, there's too many things to learn here, okay? I mean, I got to find something to do. Now, I'm not going to be learning every day, right? But there better be some learning and development, number 1. Number 2, in whatever I'm doing with a team of people, do we have the opportunity to add value? Okay. Do we have the opportunity to add value, or the way I think of it as, if we sort of disappeared for a month, would anybody know we were gone? Okay? Or are we sort of there watching, you know, paint dry and grass grow? Okay? That's a big one for me. And then the third one is, are we having fun? Okay? Sounds simple, but if we're not having any fun, something's wrong. Because we're putting a lot of hours and a lot of time into this. Okay? And by the way, if it's work for Phil and I'm actually having fun, boy, I'm going to blow him away, okay? Because he's looking at his watch and another 24 hours went by and I didn't even go home for lunch yet, all right? Now, this is all degrees, this is all a balance, right? It's not going to be fun every day. I always quote my grandfather, that's why they call it work, okay? This is not a fun parade, but if there's not some enjoyment, if I'm not learning, and from my standpoint, if Phil's the guy who reports to me, all right, we're going to spend time talking about that. You know, how diverse do you want to be? Do you want to work on another project? Do you want to work in another area? All right. Is there any? In fact, I was turning around the other way. Phil, what would you like to know about your career? What would you like to know about what you do well and not? And the other example I try to give you, for those of you that are managing people and providing feedback, and you were asking yourself, how good am I at providing feedback? How good am I? Here's the example that I use. Turns out Ryan and I went to school together. We're peers, and we got on an airplane. And you, Dan, you work for me. And on the airplane, we're very honest. We go back. We used to play ball together. And Ryan says, hey, Harry, I'm looking for somebody in my department. I know Dan works for you. What's the bottom line on Dan? You know, we're on a plane. No one's around. You know, forget human resource for a minute. What's the good, the bad, and the ugly related to Dan? What's it all look like? Let's open the kimono. Tell me what's really going on. Because I'm a good friend of his, I'm going to tell Ryan everything. I'm going to give him the whole bottom line. Interestingly enough, there's nothing I'll tell Ryan you and I have not talked about 5 times. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about open, transparent, and the way I always described it, Dan, for everybody that works for me, the only reason you don't know something, the only reason if you work for me, the reason you don't know something, is that you didn't ask. I didn't think of telling you because I thought you already knew or it wasn't even relevant. Right? You start to do things that way, you have an organization that operates much differently than 90% of organizations operate. Yes?
I got a quick, Mike Ballot, University of Minnesota. So when you're talking about this whole Dan example, there are other managers that are not willing, they don't want to lose their person. I've invested a lot of time in developing Bob, and I don't want you to take Bob from me.
Yeah.
I want to keep Bob.
Yep.
So that's a big picture organizational thing. I want to keep my guys.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought it up. Let's talk about that one. That's great you guys bring these things up because this is the stuff to talk about. The question that Dan asked me was, what do great organizations do? What do great organizations? Let me tell you what organizations often do, to your point, and what great organizations do. So what's your name?
Mike.
Mike. So here's what typically happens. Let's be honest about it. Here's Mike, okay? You're running one of the silos. You've got a person below you. Let's call him a director. And then there's 3 assistant directors. Okay? This person retires, and you've got 3 people that you want to choose which of those 3 people are going to go into this job. Right? What a great organization does, these 3 people are not owned by you. Okay? These 3 people are owned by the organization. So what those guys in great organizations do, what I personally did with my you're going to put in the job, and you feel like you say, hey, don't turn down those jobs. I'm taking care of you. You're my guy. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's not a great organization. Okay, now I got silos. Now I've got, by definition, in a mathematical sense, I've suboptimized. Okay, because we have enough people with a mathematical background. One of my little equations is if I'm trying to optimize the organization, if I'm trying to make University of Minnesota the best organization, I'm pretty convinced that the optimization of the University of Minnesota is not the sum of letting people optimize each piece individually. It'll never happen. But that takes skill set, that takes a good understanding, and my 4 favorite words: discipline, focus, consistency, credibility. And it's not easy, and there's not a lot of organizations do it. Because somebody here's got to be tough enough to say, I'm sorry, Mike, not happening. Here's what's going to happen.
I mean, the challenge, Harry, is that in their world, and you're now at Northwestern, so you know their world, the dean runs that college. And even if those guys could tell the dean, you're going to free up your finance person to go someplace else, it's not really the way that political realm works. There's a great deal of autonomy as opposed to a Baxter where there's a good deal more ability to exercise influence from the top down.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's true.
I mean, that is a challenge.
That is a big challenge.
And I've seen lots of universities, including many of yours, who want to create more lateral moves, who want to free people up to go other places. And many of you who would be willing to do that now, providing I don't lose my head count, as long as I don't get penalized for that. But that's a challenge in and of itself to get other schools to, work between central and distributed. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world that central people would go out and work in distributed people would come in and work in central. But again, there's a lot of barriers to that happening that are based on a whole variety of factors that are unique to each of these political domains. So
Absolutely.
it's a fascinating cultural and
Yep.
political study. So
Yep.
it is close to the end, Jim. I know you had a. Do you have a comment or a question?
Jim McDonald, University of Minnesota.
Oh.
If you take this movement, and I'm going to use your mathematics, I'm an engineer too. So
Ah,
if you take this movement and go from, take the limit of 0 employees moving all the way up to the maximum limit of every employee moves all the time,
yep.
does it collapse in on itself?
Well, Jim.
Or is there an optimal number of moves?
Jim,
is there an optimization curve?
Yeah. My opinion, absolutely. And I would argue, by definition, it depends a little bit on the organization, but I would never think it'd be more than 50-50. I think you need a lot of people that are specialists in a particular area, and that's what they're good at, and that's what they want to do. Okay? So in my mind, it's a happy balance. If everybody's a functional expert, by definition, you don't have anybody who can allocate resources across the total. And if everybody's a jack of all trades and master of done, I think the whole system collapses. It definitely is a medium someplace. Okay, thank you very much.